Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Joe Sullivan. He's the co-founder over at Gorilla 76. I said it right this time. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Colin. It's good to be back.
I'm enjoying having I'm getting all of Sarah's guests on that I never got a chance to meet. We are probably 300 and something episodes deep. You'll know because you'll see the little tag, but I don't know exactly which order this is going to go out in. But we've gone through some of our favorites from engagement, feedback from listeners, and Joe's one of those folks. So today we are talking about building an audience. We're going to talk about what channels Joe's using on the marketing side. We're going to talk about how do you earn people's attention and kind of balancing value creation and value capture, to sort of steal a phrase from a favorite podcast of mine. So how much do you focus on educating the buyers and providing value, and how much do you focus on selling to them? Joe, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Colin.
I'd love to start with why do we need to get in front of an audience before they're ready to buy?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? I think that I've been running my agency for almost 18 years now, and we've just seen so much change in terms of how people collect information, how companies are going to market, and I think there's been for many years there's been a sales mindset of we go cold prospect, we get in front of people, we try to give them the sales pitch, and so much of any given audience, though, is just they're not in buying mode at any moment in time. I've talked to my clients about that a lot. Like, so many companies just make the assumption in their communication with prospects or even existing customers that like they have a need right now. But the reality is, like, the buying triggers. I work with a manufacturing audience, right? And for them, like, a lot of times their customers' buying triggers are things like equipment failure, or new product development, like a new product going to market, or whatever, I don't know, existing vendor or partner drops the ball, and those triggers only come up so often. And that's when their audience is actually actively looking for something or open to being pitched something, frankly. And so if that's 1% of your audience at any moment in time, or even 10% at most, probably, it means that the rest of your audience doesn't want your sales pitch right now, right? And so I think the approach that we advocate for is, how do you do the work now in front of 100% of your total addressable market, or at least as much of that audience as you can get in front of, to help them think differently, to help them look at, one way to solve a problem versus another, to show them what they might be missing, or just pure category and product education through thought leadership content, so that you can build awareness, you can build trust now, and then when they are triggered, whether that's in a week or a month or a year or 5 years, you've already done the work to establish yourself as an authority, as the one who's been guiding them and helping them, and they either think of you first, or when they go to Google and Google search something, even if you're ranking 6th or 7th or 8th, you still win there because you've done the work to build that authority in your space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves about people sending cold email is assuming that the prospect is in buying mode. And to your point, it could be at 1%. I've heard people say 5%, which feels generous, feels like too much. But either way, I mean, the difference between 99% and 95% of people not being ready is a tiny fraction. So I'm totally in alignment that regardless of whether you're marketing or cold prospecting to somebody, assuming that they're in a buying mode off the bat is a mistake. And I think the product of that, or what the outcome of that, is people saying, I think you're in my ICP. Hey, let's have a meeting. I bet you're in pain. Let's talk about a meeting. And I think that's cart before the horse in a big way. you said a couple interesting things. And so I want to kind of take us to, before we get into kind of channels and we get more into the tactical stuff, I want to talk a little bit about audience. Now, you come at this from a marketing perspective, which is obviously, wrong, but, for a sales podcast. But I'd love to hear your perspective, because I think, there's nothing right or wrong. There's no two sides of the equation. We're all part of the revenue team. We all got to work together. And so I just like to get other perspectives on how do you think about defining an audience?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I love to talk about. I'll use an example just from an existing client of ours just to kind of frame it up. So, we work with a company that does like electrical cable assemblies that, get sold into different OEMs products. Like it might get installed in some big piece of machinery, like the electrical cable assembly. And so for these guys, when we started working with them a couple of years back, one of the first things we did is we just got inside the CRM with them. We looked at let's look at your very best customers. Like what companies are they? Okay, now let's look at who are the buying process influencers inside of those organizations. Who were the people you really needed to reach? Was it really the procurement person who was cutting the check, or was it some design engineer, or some automation engineer? Like who was the person that actually was going to be most influential in making the buying decision? And so we looked at that across, the people they actually interfaced with during their own sales processes with those customers, who their main points of contact were that keep buying from them and keep going to them for information. Like that's where we start with the audience. If this is the segment where you guys see the most opportunity because there are 50,000 other people out there who fit that job description, and you're working with 10 of them right now, but they're your best customers, like we want to start there. So I think it begins with having some focus. Like, where are we trying to grow? We can't be everything to everybody. So where is the opportunity? Where can we be most profitable? Where is there, just market growth ahead of us? And then let's figure out who are those people we really need to reach and influence. And that's where segmentation starts. And then from there, it goes into, okay, now how are we going to reach those people? What are going to be our hurdles in getting in front of them? What channels do those people use to consume information, so we know where to go and where not to go? But I'd kind of start there.
So let's say we've got a seed. You're working with a customer, and let's just hypothetically say they got 10 customers or 10 good ones that they want to build a profile on. What's your process for kind of going from the seed list of 10 to the next list of, what does the next list look like? Do you go and do everybody in the whole entire market and then narrow it down to there? Or do you try and find people that match that exactly? Do you break it out into segments, into personas? Like, how does that work on your side?
Yeah, I think it's great if you have that starting place, because now it's, I think we're going to look at what are the commonalities there. Is it job title? Is it job role, like the function they fulfill inside their company? Is there a geographic element to it? Like what type of company is it? But if it was, so let's look at the patterns and overlap among those people, and think about what all those data points are. And for us, it's often, whether you're using a tool like Apollo or something like that, or you're just inside of, LinkedIn's, ad platform, and you're building an audience segment there. Let's start with something that we can, use as a starting place, and let's expand out and see how many other people are out there that sort of fit that description. Where are those people located? What are, other data points associated with those people? So I think that's the way we often approach it. A lot of it, and we're a marketing agency, right? We're not a sales prospecting sort of firm. So we're looking at where can we reach that same type of person at scale, where those people already spend time and consume information. So often for us, it's going into LinkedIn, and that's a good starting place. And seeing what that kind of brings us. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to talk about LinkedIn for a bit, because it seems to, 10 years ago when I got into, 12 years ago? No, I've been doing this for 12 years now, and LinkedIn wasn't really a super common place for people to prospect. I was banned like 3 times from LinkedIn. I had to write a letter, like a physical letter, and mail it to LinkedIn the 3rd time.
Wow.
To get them to unlock my account. They're like, prove you're not a bot. And I was like, I'm actually just really good at copy and paste. And I was I think I invited like 567 people in a day. Before it was like I had a list and I was just like, there were no limits and I was just copy and pasting because I didn't have any money other than like, I don't even think I had LinkedIn Premium at the time. The limits were just non-existent. But over the last 12 years, LinkedIn has changed so much. It was it evolved from this place where it was people were offended if I, added them. They're like, I don't know you, to suddenly, 5-6 years ago, it was this place where CEOs were posting, thought leadership. And now it's a place where, I don't know, it feels like it's just evolved where people are, it's been reduced to the lowest common denominator. And like, I deleted my Facebook a long time ago because the quality of conversation and stuff I was seeing just like degraded very heavily. And I'm not a social media person in the first place. And then it feels like LinkedIn is kind of heading in that direction lately. I'd love your thoughts. Is it still a good place to be prospecting or to be building an audience with, especially all the noise?
It's a great question. And I think your observations are similar to what mine have been, right? And I think any platform where there is activity and opportunity is going to reach the point where people like you and me as marketers and salespeople are going to ruin it, right? Maybe not us, but the people who are abusing it, right? It's gonna happen. And has LinkedIn reached that tipping point yet? I don't know. I think you could make the argument maybe in some places it has. In my community of working with B2B manufacturers, it's not even close, right? There's still so much opportunity there. But I guess here's what I would say about LinkedIn and different ways it's that people approach it. Like, yeah, you can buy your Sales Navigator account and have your limit on how many, direct messages you can send cold to people. I don't see that stuff working. I'm sure like anything else that you do at scale, like the more you're able to scale it, the more it's going to work. I think it's because LinkedIn does put limits on how much of that you can do. There probably is a lot of limitation there, but that's not the way that I would advise anybody to use LinkedIn. So again, I'm coming at this from a marketing angle, so my perspective's a little different, but like the things that I see working, I'll talk about it from an organic perspective and a paid perspective. Organically, if you have people in your company, ideally it's, your CEO, your, some leader at your company who's going to be there for a while. If you can turn that person into, an actual producer of content, they may not be the one doing it, but maybe somebody's helping them with it to, pull the insights out of their brains to turn them into, a voice for the industry. It can be super effective. I mean, I do this. My business partner, John, does it. We probably spend 5 hours a week producing content that we publish organically on LinkedIn. We've built big followings that are very targeted. We do proactive work to just connect with people who are in our audience, even if we don't physically know them. You kind of have to, because the more people you're connected to, the more people are going to see your content, and their second connections will, potentially be exposed to your content. But I also have 6-7 other people on my team of 34 that are consistently publishing multiple times a week. And I'm not talking about like things we do and product related stuff. I'm talking about purely educating the audience we need to reach. This is our funnel. Like, this is where, for Gorilla, like this is where our best leads, the ones that actually know what they want when they get on a first sales call with us and close fast and at high margin. It's the ones who are seeing us as the experts in industrial marketing. They've been following us for, people in their form fills say things like, I've been listening to your podcast for the last 3 years and now we're looking for a marketing agency. Or we've been following Grace Wright or Brendan Forrest or Aaron Burrish or John Franco or whoever on LinkedIn and love their content. And this really resonated and we need that. So that's the power of LinkedIn organic. But it's work. It's a lot of work, and like you need consistency, and you need something to say that actually matters. On the paid side, go ahead.
Before we go to the paid side, because I'd love this is something that I struggle with, because I don't love social media. I love engaging with people. I don't love the algorithmic. You put time in, and it's algorithmically, whether or not your content makes it up and goes big, and like some of our stuff goes big, and other some of our stuff that I think is like, we put a lot of effort into just kind of fizzles there. So I'm curious, let's talk about the time that you put into your organic social. You do 5 hours a week. Is that responding to comments? Is that just content generation?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about like what you're spending your time on and what type of content you're producing.
Yeah, for sure. And frankly, like if I'm being entirely honest, it goes in waves, right? There are times where I'm 20 days in a row, I'm publishing something unique, and I'm probably put 30 minutes of work into writing something that is meaningful to my audience to teach them or help them look differently at something. So when I'm in those phases, and I'm really rolling. It may be that much. It may be, where half of my time is spent writing something unique, maybe 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week. And then, what's the other half? It's having curated a network of people so that the things that are coming through my feed are actually relevant to me. Almost everything that crosses my feed is manufacturing related, because that's my audience, and I don't need to be commenting on other marketing agency owners' stuff because that's not who I'm talking to, right? So I want to see things that I can add, where I can add value to the conversation, because when I comment there, then those audiences are going to see, my commentary, and I'm going to get follows on that. And now I have a bigger audience that I'm talking to that's relevant to me. So I think, if you look at the breakdown of how time's being spent, if I had to like draw up a playbook, I think the ideal playbook is you're probably spending 75% of your time publishing unique insights that are meaningful to your audience and helpful to them. And then, the other 25% is doing some combination of commenting on other people's things, connecting with people, etc. I'd probably break it down that way.
I'm curious on your feed, because mine is mostly filled with not the greatest stuff. What do you do to curate your feed?
Some of it just happens naturally, but based on what I interact with, what I comment on. LinkedIn's gonna be really good at showing me more of that. But you can unfollow people. People get, you're seeing stuff that's, I can think of a few companies. It's just pure spam. It's just, talking about themselves, trying to sell stuff. And you want to just get that stuff out of there. And I think, the algorithm reacts to that too. So I think a lot of it is just the way how active you are and the things you choose to interact with. It's a lot of it will happen naturally.
Okay, good to know. I get a ton of notifications on LinkedIn, and we've got a marketing team. They're like, "Hey, you should pay attention to these ones. You should pay attention to these ones." So I've got somebody that kind of helps filter and bubble things up. But otherwise, I tend not to go into the home. I find I'm not finding relevant conversations where I feel like I meaningfully engaging. It's all like people selling stuff. Or like
it's a lot of noise.
Sales humor. And like, there's nothing wrong with sales humor, like the channel, the brand. Like, I think we've done some stuff with them before. It's like, it's not why I go to LinkedIn,
Totally. Yep. No, I hear you.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Enough of old man anti-social media guy, Colin. Let's talk about paid social.
Yeah.
So if you're, could you do without doing the organic social, or do the two kind of go hand in hand?
You could look at them separately for sure. And I think this is why, I look at my own company's marketing, and we invest heavily in organic because the people inside my company are marketers, and we understand the value of it. We see the return. It's very obvious, like in our world, like what, when the form fills on my site say that this is how I found you consistently, and those are the deals that are actually closing. So like the value of that is very clear to me in my world. But again, it's a lot of work and from a lot of people. When I think about how we help our clients, who tend to be more traditional manufacturers, go to market using a tool like LinkedIn or even Facebook, believe it or not, it's going to be using a media budget and saying, essentially what you're doing is you're telling LinkedIn, show this content to people who fit this exact profile, and show it to them this many times a month, and also show them this piece of content from this campaign. And once they've seen each of those things 3 times, don't show it again. Instead, show them this. And so you can control the messaging. You can tell a complete story that includes product education, category education, social proof, pure thought leadership. We will design campaigns differently for different audiences based on what story we need to tell, what complete story really we need to tell. So when you think about, the company I mentioned earlier that does these cable assemblies, and they were targeting, various engineering job titles, and we identified, I think it was an audience of like 83,000 human beings who fit that job description that had LinkedIn profiles. Now, we're not naive in thinking that those 83,000 people signed in, like probably half of them created a LinkedIn profile and never signed in again. And, 20% of them pop in periodically, but they're not really paying attention. But what we found is when we're running these programs in the industrial sector, which is you think compared to SaaS or something, like it's pretty inactive compared to other more tech savvy industries in terms of who's actually in there. So the percentage of people you're going to reach probably goes up if you're in software or some professional services or something. But with our manufacturing audiences, we find we can usually reach consistently probably 20% of any given audience. So like the analogy I use is I'm a Packers fan. I grew up in Wisconsin. So I always throw this picture of Lambeau Field up on screen, and I'm like, okay, and the NFL stadium fits, give or take some 80,000 people. So imagine you could take that 80,000 person audience, sit them down in that stadium, and when 80% of them get up to get a beer and a hot dog at halftime, the 15,000 that stay in their seats, imagine you could stand up on stage with a microphone and talk to them for 1 minute about whatever you want. And maybe week one, it's product A versus product B comparison. And the next week two, everybody's back. Now you're talking about ways to solve this common problem that people with that exact engineering job title in that exact type of company tend to have. And the next week, it's social proof. You're telling a success story. The next week, one of your customers is up on stage next to you, telling the story for you and how you help transform their business. And you're sort of like infusing among that the call to action. Let's have a low pressure sales conversation and see if we can help you figure out a better way to do what you're doing, or whatever that looks like, right? And so that's the power of these platforms, is but it all comes down to who are we targeting and what do those people actually care about? Because if all you're doing is throwing a sales pitch at them, then you're just being screened the same way you are when you're, cold calling or knocking on a door or, blasting cold emails. So it has to start with messaging and content that actually is meaningful to the exact person you're trying to reach. And when you can do that time after time after time, we usually are trying to be in front of our clients' audiences between 5 and 10 times a month in platform, just to give you context. So being able to tell that story in a low pressure way in a place where they're already consuming information. Because people don't use LinkedIn you don't go to LinkedIn to try to find an article to read on somebody else's site for 15 minutes. You go there and you consume little bits of information as you scroll, right? And so the key is thinking about how people actually want to consume information and how we can adjust our messaging, the strategy for delivering our messaging and content to them in that way.
Interesting. I wonder, like you said, you're trying to get in front of them 5 to 10 times in a month. Audience size of 20,000 people, roughly.
Sure. Yeah.
What's your average spend for something like that? And you don't have to tell me yours, but I'm just kind of curious. Yeah. If somebody's listening and they're like, I want to reach people on LinkedIn, what should they factor in? Because I know you probably can't do it for $50 a month. If you're only spending $50 a month, you're probably doing it wrong. Like I've heard there are certain kind of minimum buy-in, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. So, if you're trying to, we've found 5 to 10 touch points a month is probably, that tends to be the ideal sweet spot to actually, because you think about when you see a TV commercial for the 50th time, you want to pull your hair out, right? But you see it once and it's not going to stick. So we found that 5 to 10 times a month where the message is varied, it's enough to start building positive brand awareness and to see how people are responding. So if you use that as the benchmark and we're targeting an audience of, I don't know, let's just say, I'd say anywhere from 20 to 100,000 is typical, just depending on who the company is. We're usually recommending a media buy of anywhere from 5 to 10K a month as an ad buy. So again, this is marketing, right? We're not talking about a budget for a salesperson to go out and whatever, right? But that's kind of, that tends to be what, at a high end, I think our clients are probably spending 10, maybe 15 in some cases, depending on how competitive your space is and how many people you need to reach, but it gives you maybe a little bit of context.
Yeah, cool. That's super helpful.
Yep.
One of the other channels we were going to talk about, which doesn't require money, is email. Talk to me about how you use email, your email newsletters.
I almost feel old school when I say this, but I still love email. I think that like the problem is the way the channel has been abused. That's the problem. My company has been writing an email newsletter every other week for like 15 years and to a very targeted audience, but we don't write a newsletter and that is a sales pitch and talk about our services and try to prompt sales calls. Like, we use a twice a month newsletter to essentially deliver helpful, meaningful insights and content to the manufacturing leaders and manufacturing marketing people that are, frankly, some of them follow us religiously because we're constantly creating value. So I look at email almost the same way I would look at paid social or physically putting a piece of mail in, through the U.S. Postal Service in the mail. They're just distribution channels for messaging and content. It's another way to distribute messaging and content to the people you need to reach and influence. So what really matters is the thing you have to say. Is the thing you have to say actually meaningful to those individuals, or are you just spamming them with sales messaging that they don't want to hear? So if you can cultivate an audience, regardless of where you do it, and be able to engage them and use it as a way to build trust in your expertise and for them to see you as the expert, well, then it comes back to the same thing I talked about earlier. When people get triggered because their current vendor or partner drops the ball, or they've got a new product going to market, or their piece of machinery fails, or whatever it is that triggers them to go look for a new solution, like, you're already there, you're top of mind, they know you, they may even know your name, and they reach out to you. And so I think that's the way I look at email. I think most people use email as just from a sales prospecting perspective, or as if it is from a marketing perspective, it's, hey, we're going to be at this trade show next month, come to booth 687 and maybe product updates from time to time, which it's not to say you shouldn't be doing that stuff, but that should be 10% of what you're doing. The 90% should be actually being a resource to your audience.
Love it. You said the word spam, and it always makes me think of like I watched a show last night, and the guy was doing something with spam, and I was like the actual food product, and I was like, where did the etymology of the word come from? Because we all know the canned ham that's probably 51% ham. The etymology of spam, using it in the term that we're using it for cold email or just any kind of lack of quality or intent, comes from Monty Python.
Is that right?
There's a skit. Yeah, there's a skit with a menu board, and it was like egg and spam, egg, bacon and spam, egg, bacon and spam, spam, sausage and spam, spam, spam and spam, spam, spam and egg and spam. That's apparently it's from the 1970s, and people started using that for actual mail, cold spam, when you're physically sending people newsletters or
no kidding,
ads over the physical mail. Anyway, sorry for the I just ended up in a Wikipedia hole last night and was like, I got to break this up today because he mentioned the word spam, and that's where my brain went.
There you go. Glad I gave you the opportunity to enlighten our audience about that one.
Plus, Monty Python, anytime you bring Monty Python into a podcast is a good day. It's a good day.
I agree with that.
I'll see if we can track down a link to the clip and throw it in the show notes if we can.
Yeah.
On the newsletter side, it's, so much of it is about balancing. So you're 90%. The thing I'm curious about, if you're spending 30 minutes a day creating content for LinkedIn, are you also creating other original content for the newsletter? Or is it some of those ideas shared? Are they different? How does that work?
Great question. If you have an insight, a meaningful insight for your audience, you should just look at all these different places as other vehicles for distributing that. So repurpose. I think that's probably one of the missed opportunities, and why content marketing becomes overwhelming for a lot of companies. If you have a unique insight you can deliver, it could be, you could record a podcast episode I could take this recording because, most of I host a podcast and I'm putting the spotlight on others the way you're putting it on me right now. But like, I could take the recording of this episode when we're done, which will be, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes long, whatever it comes to. And I could probably cut this up into 30 different clips that are all a minute long, that are all meaningful in their own right. And frankly, I could distribute that content for months in a newsletter, in, as a little video clips on LinkedIn. I could use paid LinkedIn to distribute those same insights to my audiences in addition to organically. So I think that's the mindset you want to get into is like, you got to figure out what things your audience actually cares about, lean into that, and then be efficient with creation of messaging and content and other assets, because you can distribute. Sometimes you might just have to reformat something a little differently. But like my newsletter at Gorilla is, at this point, all it is repurposing one of the best posts that either I or somebody on my team published in the last few weeks. The ones that get 25 likes and 1,500 views tell me this didn't really resonate. The ones that get 200 likes and 100 comments and reach 10,000 people organically, like, there's a reason that happened, right? And so if it worked in this channel, and I'm going to go touch the same audience that may or may not have even seen that on LinkedIn through distributing it by email to 6,000 people who fit my ideal customer profile, like, it's almost validation. Like, LinkedIn or other social channels can be really great validation for what messaging is actually going to work. So you can then go repurpose it in other places where you can maybe reach others as well.
Yeah, interesting. So you're using LinkedIn almost as a test kitchen for ideas to see what resonates, and then you're doubling down for the newsletter, maybe expanding a little bit on it, but repurposing the best performing content.
Yeah, and here's actually something that's interesting that's completely flipped for me over the last decade. So like 10 years ago, I would have written a 3,000 word white paper that was, some 10-page PDF, published it on my website. We would have taken the little chapters from that, published them as blog posts that could be indexed and searched for SEO purposes, maybe taken one of those, turned it into a newsletter, and then maybe broken that one piece down into 5 social posts or something and spit those out. But in retrospect, that was all backwards, because now what I'm doing is I'm investing 20 hours into writing some deep piece of content, assuming it's going to resonate with my audience, when the way to really do it is to say, why not publish 5 different LinkedIn posts, watch these 2 completely fall flat, watch these 2 do fine, and watch this one skyrocket in terms of engagement. And now I know I'm onto something that's meaningful to my audience. So now what can I do with that? Because all I did was invest 30 minutes into making that. And I didn't lose anything on other than an hour on the 2 that fell flat. So I think test kitchen's a nice way to look at it, is how can you, and we do the same thing when we're running paid social for a client. Like the first month we describe as audience validation and message validation. Like, we want to see what messaging is resonating and if we're reaching the right people. Because you could run a video. Like, Colin, you could get off this and record a 1-minute video of yourself talking to your audience, and you could run 2 of them. One of them, maybe you'll get feedback from the paid social platform that people dropped off on average after 6 seconds. And the other one, people watched it 90% of the way through and listened to you for almost 2 minutes. What does that tell you about what message is resonating? Like, that is amazing market research that you can use to double down on, to pull into sales conversations, see how people react that way. So I don't know. I think there's so much value into the micro approach to content and messaging as actual market research. And that's the beauty of some of the technology we have available to us today, is just to get real analytics back on what's working, so you know where to double down and what to just cut or refine.
And getting it back, not just, at the end of once you've written this big 10,000 word,
exactly
piece, you get it back in snippets. Hey, this is more important. Hey, here's some feedback. Here's some comments. This is what got people excited. This is what fell flat.
Yeah, and it's the same as anything else. Like, even sales prospecting, like you want to go in. Your time is your greatest asset, so you want to go in knowing it's being used as efficiently as possible. I would much rather know that this message is going to resonate with my audience after a half hour of work than after 10 or 20 hours of work, right? And so that's those signals that you need to be looking for early on to help you change course, refine, double down, are just so key.
Interesting. You heard it here first. Do less work. Makes everything
do less work
so much easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I heard you say something earlier that I think it was around your ads, that LinkedIn is for consuming content on the platform, not for clicking on a link and going elsewhere. Could you expand on that?
Yeah. I think that our inclinations are naturally to say, let's get people to our website or into a sales conversation or whatever it is. Like we want to bring people back to where we can control the conversation and what they're seeing. But the problem with that mindset is that's what you want. It's not what your audience wants. And I kind of said this earlier, but if you think of anybody listening right now, just think of how you use Facebook or LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram or wherever you spend time. If you're not like Colin, who deleted his Facebook account, which I applaud you for, by the way. But, think about how you use those platforms, right? You don't sit there. You don't like, okay, I'm on my lunch break. I'm going to pull open LinkedIn and I'm going to scroll for something that I can click on so I can go read an article or watch a video on some person's website for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Nobody does that, right? You go on there because you're just kind of killing time and you're like you look to consume things in 30-second segments, right? Whether you're reading a short article, you're watching a short video. That's why shorter videos tend to perform better than 10-minute videos that you publish on LinkedIn, because people's attention span is not long enough, especially when you're in that mindset, right? So if you could just let
100x the engagement on YouTube on our snippets than we do on the long form videos. We have some people that only watch on full episodes on YouTube. And we do have a few like regulars there, but the number of views that we get from like the carved up snippets is like 100x more engagement.
Yeah, I'd believe it. We stopped publishing the full episodes in video format for that reason. It wasn't even worth it because we were probably doing more editing than we really needed to be and stuff, but it was a lot of work with very little return versus the micro clips that we distribute on LinkedIn or when we do publish them on YouTube. Yeah, they perform.
So yeah, we're talking about on platform producing content so they can be consumed on platform because people don't want to leave the platform.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So if you can shift your mindset from I need to take control of the conversation. I need to bring them back to my website so they spend the time there. I need to get them into a sales conversation and instead think about how can I create value in the way that they want to consume information, which is in small snippets. Then you've got the opportunity to win. Because if you could be in front of those people on a regular basis, delivering, it can be product education, it can be pure thought leadership, it can be social proof. Like there's so many ways that you can be telling the story and doing it in a way that they actually want to consume information. You have to go in with some level of trust that them seeing the right messaging time after time after time after time, if there truly is product market fit there, and when there is a buying need, like they're gonna think of you. And I know salespeople don't like to hear that because it's like we got to go get them now. But the problem again is that you gotta think about what mindset those people are in. Like when are they actually going to be triggered? How do they actually want to consume information and play to that?
And I think that's we talk about resonating with your prospects. If you're coming in as a paratrooper from outside the platform and being like, hey, here's this piece that worked somewhere else. I'm just going to copy paste it to this platform, whether it's LinkedIn or Reddit or Facebook or YouTube. It shows that you're not, you don't know what's going on the platform. You don't know what the norms look like. It's that great Steve Buscemi clip from I think it's 30 Rock where he's like, hey kids, or it's some movie where he's pretending to be a kid and he's clearly 50. Hello, fellow children.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of, we've made that mistake on LinkedIn where we're posting, stuff that worked for us on the blog. We're like, just copy paste it to the LinkedIn. Or on YouTube, the reason our podcasts still go up in full length into YouTube. I do think we have some people that watch the full ones on there. It's just an easier platform for them to consume. But I'd say once we started clipping it and creating content that was specifically designed for YouTube, same with LinkedIn, things got a whole lot better.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think there's a balance to find there too, right? You can't customize content for 15 different platforms because who has time for that, right? But you're probably better off as opposed to saying we're going to customize stuff for 15 platforms or we're going to just spit the same thing in the exact same format into 15 different platforms. You're probably better off saying let's commit to email and to LinkedIn organic, or whatever those things are going to be for you, where you know you can reach your audience and you can be effective and do those 2 or 3 things really, really well and consistently. And then you're going to get traction there. And once that starts working, you can say, okay, now where else can we go with this now that this is working, right?
Totally. I want to get to like finding a place to talk about kind of the balance of like educating versus selling. Before we do, I do want to ask you, where do your subscribers for the newsletter come from? I know where followers come from. Comes from LinkedIn, comes from engaging on the platform. That's how you kind of grow your, it's those thoughtful conversations. That's the mechanism for you growing. And I imagine you're doing some adding of people that might be in your audience.
Sure.
But with the newsletter, where do your subscribers come from?
Yeah, good question. A lot of them just happen organically through our website still. Always have. We have prompts around our website. It's one of the lowest, commitments that somebody could make who's actually interested in what you have to say, is to just, we don't ask for them to fill out 7, fields and then hit them with a sales call after. We just, give us your name and email address and subscribe, right? So keep the barrier low. Not ask for too much in return. And so that's one place that it's always just sort of happened. Periodically we'll prompt, we'll post something on LinkedIn, like piece of content, and say, hey, to get more stuff like this and, on a weekly or every other week basis, subscribe to our newsletter. We'll drive them there. Don't do a lot of that, to be honest with you. And frankly, we probably could do more of it. And then there's just the sales conversations that happen, people who are in dialogue with us, where they're always going to be dropped into our newsletter because it's a non-aggressive way to just kind of keep creating value for people. If I'm being entirely honest, I think we invested much more heavily in building that list 5 to 10 years ago than we do now, because I think a lot of it's just return on effort. And I think the thing that we see working best right now are there's 2 things. It's our podcasts and it is what we're doing organically on LinkedIn. And so that's really where we've channeled our effort. And that goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, like pick where you can win and where you see yourself winning, and do it really, really well and consistently. And those have been really the places we focus the last few years.
Interesting. Tell me about the podcast. What's working for you?
Yeah. So my company has 3 podcasts. My podcast is called The Manufacturing Executive, and I launched it almost exactly 4 years ago. So I'm coming up on episode 200, which is 200 episodes in 200 weeks, every Tuesday morning for about 4 years. Started with basically, no subscribers, and as a way to just put the spotlight on manufacturing leaders who are my audience, right? I wanted to create value. Again, it's not us selling marketing at them, even teaching. It's not even a marketing show. It's me interviewing manufacturing leaders about the things that matter to manufacturing leaders, so to their peers. By doing it that way, we were able to start building an audience pretty quickly, where we're, 1,000 to 1,500 weekly listeners on the show. But it's my exact audience. And the way I've heard it described, this comes from, I think, James Carberry at Sweetfish Media, podcasting agency. He describes it as like the Oprah effect, where, Oprah is not an expert in any of the things for the people who would come on her show, like their worlds. She's the ultimate interviewer, and and there's this halo effect of when you put yourself side by side with, in my case, leaders in the manufacturing industry, it just sheds a positive light on me, because I'm the one facilitating these conversations, just like you're facilitating conversations with people in business development, sales, and in today's case, marketing, right? So I think that effect is what helped us to build an audience. It helped build our reputation in that space bit by bit over time. And I will stick to this. I have a goal of never asking for a sales call from anybody who's ever been on my podcast. I've never followed up. I've never asked, but it just happens, because simply by you when you facilitate a 45-minute conversation with somebody, they're going to ask you in turn, so tell me a little bit about what you do. And then I start talking about it, and they're like, wow, that's really interesting. Let's set up a call next week. I want you to talk to my marketing director or whatever, right? And so I think that's been a huge positive for us. I know it's one of the 2 leading drivers of our own pipeline now, because we have put I stole this from Refine Labs. I don't know if you've heard of that agency before, but Chris Walker. Okay, yeah, he's awesome. But anyway, we stole this from them because they talk about it publicly. Just put the simple field in the forms on your website. How did you hear about us? Just ask that question, because what your HubSpot data tells you, or your Pardot data or Marketo or whatever, in terms of what the lead source was, is often not really true, because somebody might find you through a Google, so your CRM or your marketing automation platform is going to say this person found you through a Google search, right? But what really happened is they've been listening to your podcast for 2 years, and now they know that they're going to hire Gorilla 76, so they search my company name. So what's the real source there? Google? No, it's the podcast, right? So you want that data coming back, and I know, because we asked that question. Almost every good lead that actually closes at the right margin for us says we either found you on LinkedIn or we found you through your podcast. So that's the impact there. Now, what we did since that show's been running for 4 years. Well, 2 years ago, we launched the Manufacturing Marketer, whereas my show's for CEOs, presidents, owners, and all the content is designed for them. Now we launched a show called the Manufacturing Marketer, which targets the marketing leader inside of those same companies. And that one is more our team teaching. We run a live web show every other week. We turn it into a podcast. We do commentary for like filler episodes on what was talked about on those live web shows. And so that's all pure education for marketers in the manufacturing sector about how to be successful doing marketing in manufacturing. So a completely different audience, but same companies. And then about a year ago, my business partner, John, who runs the people side of our business, launched a show called The Manufacturing Employer, which is targeting the HR managers, the people responsible for building culture, recruiting, retention. So completely different content. Still an overlap with like the manufacturing leader audience, but it's really focused on the people responsible for people. So we've just watched each of these pieces start to work and see the effect of that. And then you layer in another thing. Because I've companies look at, or people ask me like, how do you do all this stuff? You have this live web show that draws 100 people every other week. You've got 3 podcasts. You have 7 or 8 people publishing stuff regularly on LinkedIn. How do you possibly do that? The answer is, we've started doing things one piece at a time over a decade, and we just keep layering another thing on once that last thing starts working, and we find either a new audience like within our audience to go to, or another way to extend the reach of the content. And so I think that's what it requires. It all comes down to who are we targeting, what do we need to say to them, how are we going to reach them? Now let's watch it work, and then let's build on that.
Love it. I want to get to one last question, which is how do you balance, like so much of what we've talked about today has been adding value, educating, insights. You're a marketer. I'm a sales guy. At some point, the conversation's got to have some teeth to it. How do you balance that? Is there a perfect ratio? Is it just sort of a timely thing? Like how and when do you eventually add the kind of sales and marketing teeth to the conversation?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'll apologize ahead of time to any SDRs listening right now, because my intention is not to throw you guys under the bus. That's like the ones who do it well. But I think that what we find, with our audience that we work with, is a salesperson's time is much better spent talking to a lead that actually has buying intent and has, is in market, fits the profile really well, than calling cold on 100 people a day or whatever the number is. And so probably some people here are nodding and some people are like wanting to punch me in the face, right? But I think
I don't think anybody wants to punch you in the face. I think every SDR is going to agree. I'd rather have a warm lead, and I think we all 100% understand that going cold is the hardest thing to do, and so you may as well start with your stuff. So I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you or want to punch you in the face for saying something so obvious.
Good to hear.
Or harder. Anybody who's working cold is like, fuck, I wish we had those.
Yeah.
Give me the Glengarry leads, man.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. All right, good. Well, I feel a little better then now. You know your audience better than mine, or than I know your audience, obviously. But here's what I can tell you. When I look at, sometimes we're our own best case study because we don't do the cobbler's kid thing. Like, we practice what we preach to an extreme, I think, in our own business. And what I could tell you is 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, but definitely 5 years ago and before that, when I looked at the form submissions we would get on our website for people who wanted to have a sales conversation with me, I could go in to HubSpot and I could look at where those people came from, and I could look at what pages they viewed on our website. And usually it looks something like this. They came in through our homepage or one or two other pages on our site that I know are ranking for things like manufacturing marketing, industrial marketing agency, things like the expected things that we've done some work to build that real estate. Most of them looked at one of those pages and they went to our contact us form and they filled out the form and we're having a sales call. That person has, up to that point when I get on the phone with them, spent probably 5 minutes or less with my company, like understanding what we do, seeing what value we could create for them. It's pretty much a call, it's an inbound call. They have a need. That's the good part, right? There's a reason they're reaching out to an industrial marketing agency like us, but they know nothing about what we do. And there's no reason to believe we're any better than one of the other companies that they also filled out the contact form on, because that company also ranked for industrial marketing. Okay, so those were my sales conversations 5 years ago. Now, my sales conversations are like, what happens is I see that form fill. I see they say something like I said earlier, I've been following your strategy director, Grace, for the last year. I've been attending your industrial marketing live sessions every other week. I've been listening to the manufacturing marketer or the manufacturing executive or the manufacturing employer. I've been reading your newsletter for months. We're having this problem. This thing you said multiple times is really resonating with me. I ran it by our CEO. He agrees we need to have a call. Then I go look at what pages they've looked at on our site. They've been on our site 5 times over the last 2 weeks. They've consumed 50 different pieces of content on our site. Like, who do you think is going to produce a better outcome for me? The former or the latter? Like, it's the rhetorical question, but like, that's the difference between when you can do the work on the marketing side. This is why marketing and sales have got to be in sync. And maybe that's a takeaway from this, is like, there's so much of marketing operating in their silo and sales operating in theirs. If we could get aligned on who the audience is, really uncover what matters to them, get the messaging right, have a distribution strategy so marketing can be doing the work at scale in the background to educate the audience, to prime the audience, then your sales calls are going to look completely different. Your inbound leads are going to grow. They're going to be better, more informed leads. Your job as a salesperson is going to be a heck of a lot easier when you don't have to convince them. I mean, on my best sales calls, they're trying to convince me. I have a 3-month waiting list to start with new customers right now, and they're trying to convince me, like, how can I get you to start next week? I can't do it. We're over capacity right now. But like, when people are begging you to work with them versus you having to convince them, I mean, think about how the dynamic changes inside your business. So, I realize I'm talking about this in like a utopian way almost, but this is what happens. Like, when you can do the work on the marketing side ahead of and at the same time as sales, it's a different conversation. I think the only other thing I'd add there is, when marketing can enable sales, when you're making the content and you've got the messaging right, and marketing can be giving sales that, well, you get off a sales call and you say, hey, your follow-up email isn't, hey, just checking in to see if you're interested in what we talked about. But instead, it's like you hit them with an email the next day that says, hey, I know we talked about this. We didn't get to go in depth, but we have this video that this person on our team recorded about this 6 months ago, and I thought this would be really helpful to you so you could learn a little bit more about that. Or here's this customer just like yours. We've got this case study we wrote about them and tells their success story. And like, if you can be nurturing with that kind of follow-up as opposed to the just checking in email, you're just going to keep building trust until that person is ready to kind of keep that conversation going.
Love it. Joe, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing everything you had today. I feel like we could have just kept going, and I've had to like stop myself from asking more questions. Otherwise, this would be an 1.5 hour long show. Last question, tell me what it is that you do at Gorilla 76, just in case it's not obvious to everybody else that's been listening.
Yeah, you've probably figured that out by now, but I appreciate you asking anyway. So, I'd say we help B2B manufacturers build revenue-focused marketing programs. It's really get the messaging right for the right people. It's figure out how to surround that with expert content and figure out how to consistently build trust and awareness at scale in front of the market to open the door to the right types of sales conversations.
Love it. Joe, if people are trying to get in touch, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. I'm one of about 10,000 Joe Sullivans, so that should be easy. But for real, Gorilla76, Gorilla like the animal, 76.com is our website. You can look up Joe Sullivan, Gorilla76 on LinkedIn, and kind of see what we're doing there. I'd probably send you those two places.
Cool. I'll throw a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. And Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, I really appreciate the opportunity, Colin. It was a really good time.
Great to have you back. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll see y'all next week.